Already this year, Paul Rudd has starred in 2 films for the indie studio A24. Friendship, the higher profile one we will get to soon enough, but this one just landed on HBO Max. The fantasy horror comedy Death of a Unicorn. Let's talk about it. Hey guys, Dan here. This is Dan Reviews It. Welcome to my spoiler-free review for Death of a Unicorn. This is streaming now on HBO Max. If you missed it in its brief run in theaters earlier this year, it features Paul Rudd, Jenna Ortega, Will Poulter, Téa Leoni, and Richard E. Grant, and not too many other people. This is a pretty small cast overall, but we'll talk about all of this here in just a moment. First, though, let me welcome you back to the channel. If you are a subscriber already for Dan Reviews It, thank you so much for that. I love it when you guys return and check out my videos. But if you're not, please consider subscribing. Click that notification bell, too, so you get the alerts for all my new video drops. And, of course, liking and commenting on this video help the channel out tremendously, so I certainly do appreciate that. All right, so we have Paul Rudd and Jenna Ortega as a father-daughter duo. Elliot Kintner is the Paul Rudd character, and he is a recent widower. I forget what the male version is, but and he is now a single father taking care of Ridley, who is the Jenna Ortega character, and they are on their way to this big weekend at Elliot's boss's house, who is played by Richard E. Grant, and him and his family. The wife played by Téa Leoni, the son by Will Poulter, and their butler, played by Anthony Carrigan, who you may know from Barry, or currently he's on Twisted Metal on Peacock, if you don't know the name. But on the way there, they hit a unicorn on the highway, or, whatever. It's not really a highway. It's a smaller sort of mountainous road. But anyway, they are not sure what to do with this, but Ridley touches its horn and starts experiencing these weird visions. And Elliot abruptly stops them by beating the unicorn with a tire iron. And so now they arrive at his boss's place all bloodied and trying to sort of explain it away. And so the unicorn ends up being, or the unicorn's family, I should say, ends up trying to hunt down the killers of their baby unicorn. So that's the basic premise. And look, A24, known for their sort of oddball movies. I talk about this all the time whenever I review an A24 film, so I do apologize for the repetition. But I think it's worth pointing out that typically, good or bad, A24 films almost always offer us something unique, something a little different. And this movie certainly has that going for it. It's an interesting premise, and it turns into a few different kind of genres. Like I mentioned up top, this is sort of regarded as a fantasy horror comedy. The comedy presents itself sort of in a satirical way, and we'll get to that. The horror, that sort of is self-explanatory, as is kind of the fantasy element of this. So look, this one is a more middle-of-the-road A24 film for me. Some of these A24 movies I really give high marks to, and recently there have been a lot that have sort of been more in the middle for me. You can check out my review for Opus that I did a few weeks ago. That is available now on HBO Max as well. Didn't love that one. This one a little bit better, but let's talk about the positives and the negatives. I would say in the positive category, look, I do like the idea of the plot here. I think the satire, though not as biting as we've certainly seen in other movies of this type, this does have a lot to say about sort of the wealthy versus I don't want to say the poverty stricken, but maybe the more working class, which is Paul Rudd and Jenna Ortega's character. These guys, his boss that he's going to. I mean, these guys are just rich beyond belief, and so they've got all of this sort of snootiness and this air about them that Paul Rudd and Jenna Ortega's characters can't really relate to. She doesn't want to be there at all. Their relationship a bit strained, it seems, after her mother passed. We kind of gauge that a little bit in the opening scene before they hit the unicorn, and then it goes from there with little moments here and there where we see their relationship straining. But through the face of adversity, obviously, family is going to stick with family. And so the two of them form a stronger bond because of that. But there is definitely, a bit of satirical play with, the rich versus the working class kind of thing. But there's also some ethical dilemmas here, obviously, because they kill this unicorn, they, basically do a hit and run on it. They don't report it. They come, to this boss's house all bloodied and are trying to explain that away. So there is, some ethical questions that are brought up by this movie that I didn't hate. Some interesting food for thought, let's say. But that's mainly where my positives come to an end. Although, speaking of end, I will admit, I do think this movie kind of stuck the landing in terms of its messaging and sort of getting out, I think, at the right time and on a good note. I did enjoy, the wrap up of this movie, the last, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, was definitely exciting and interesting. But again, that is, I think, where we're going to kind of leave the positives. The negatives are fairly obvious. I mean, I think the major one here is that the CGI of these unicorns is just not very good. And I understand, look, A24 is a smaller company. They don't have Marvel money. They don't have, Mission Impossible kind of money, whatever. But I think maybe, I don't know, the use of practical effects might have come into play better here. Because I did not think the CGI for the most part worked. And then there's the matter of the casting. Nobody did a bad job with their performance, but we have seen almost all of these people in similar roles. You could start with Richard E. Grant, the head of a very wealthy family. Well, we just saw that in Saltburn pretty recently, didn't we? And then, Jenna Ortega. Look, I like Jenna Ortega, and I like Wednesday, and I like I like that Beetlejuice movie last year, but she is definitely falling into this pattern of let's do a lot of similar roles. Let's strike while the iron is hot. I'm sure she's getting offers, that she's turning down left and right as well. But I would be very curious to see, look, so far her career has been, very sort of macabre. Reminds me a lot of Winona Ryder, speaking of Beetlejuice. In some of her earlier films, you had Beetlejuice and then Edward Scissorhands. And, she was sort of getting pigeonholed, but then she started breaking out into these other roles, like, The Age of Innocence, for example. I would love to see Jenna Ortega, and she's done, a couple of indie movies that I've reviewed on the channel here, where yes, she is doing something different, something maybe more dramatic or what have you, and those have been very well received. Um, Not widely seen, but well received. But all of these high profile roles of hers harken back to this kind of macabre thing. We've seen her do this over and over and over again. The sullen, angsty teenager, a little bit dark in her motif. Okay, so nothing new there. And Paul Rudd, look, he's just sort of along for the ride. I like Paul Rudd a lot, but I am realizing after his 40th movie or whatever, he's done so many movies, that he doesn't have a ton of range, so he's just kind of doing his thing. And it's interesting, we'll talk in probably a week or two about Friendship, the other movie with Paul Rudd from this year. And honestly, these two characters are not played that much differently, even though they're two completely different characters. His Elliot here and his character in Friendship. So, Paul Rudd. I don't know. Was it bad casting, or is the part just not written all that well, or is Paul Rudd just sort of sleepwalking through this performance? I don't know. Might be a combination of the three. This was written and directed by newcomer Alex Sharfman, who I'm not familiar with, but this was his directorial debut. I'm not sure if he's written other things or not, but for directing, this is the number one feature for him. I liked Will Poulter's character, and I really liked the butler character a lot. He had some humor to the mix that I guess is a little bit more in that satirical vein as we're looking at, rich versus working class. He's certainly working for the rich family. So I thought, that was interesting. So look, this is definitely a mixed bag for me. It falls in line with some of those other A24 productions that even though maybe they're not super positive or super negative, at least it was trying to do something original. I'm not sure that it always worked. But when it did, I think it was, good enough. So I believe Death of a Unicorn with a C plus, and you can see this on HBO Max right now. All right, thanks for watching Dave Reviews It. I will see you next time. Bye.